Have you ever witnessed a moment so unexpected, so brutally direct, so culturally explosive that the entire room goes silent before it even understands what happened? Because that's exactly the kind of moment this story revolves around. The night when Queen Latifah, Hollywood royalty with decades of respect behind her name, stood on the glittering stage of the 2025 Fashion Trust Arabia Awards and uttered a nickname Meghan Markle hoped the world had buried forever. Yacht Princess. 2 words, delivered as casually as a hostess greeting a guest, and yet they detonated in the hall like a hidden explosive. But here's the real question. Why would someone as controlled, as seasoned, as universally liked as Queen Latifah choose that moment and that nickname? What pushed her to call out someone with such precision in front of cameras, designers, royalty, and the global fashion elite? And why did Meghan freeze the instant the words left Latifah's mouth, as though she had been struck by something no one else could see? These are the shadows behind the headline. But to understand them, you need to rewind the tape and see what the cameras didn't show. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Picture it. Doha. A night soaked in gold light and desert air, the kind of evening that feels engineered for glamour. Every fabric shimmered. Every jewel seemed brighter under the curated lighting. High-profile designers hovered around their muses, stylists made last-minute adjustments, and photographers fought for angles sharp enough to cut diamonds. Awards season nerves pulsed beneath the surface, but the tone remained celebratory. At least until Meghan Markle stepped onto the scene, draped in a gown the color of a polished storm cloud, chin lifted, walked deliberate. You could feel the shift. Rooms have energy, and sometimes a single person alters that energy just by entering. Was it confidence? Was it tension? Was it the ghosts of conversations past? Everyone felt it, and that alone should tell you something. Meghan didn't just walk into the room. She arrived as if the night was hers to narrate. And maybe that's where the first crack formed. Because while Meghan projected that familiar blend of poise and self-curated glamour, there was someone watching her with a different lens entirely. Someone who had been in this industry longer than Meghan had been alive. Someone who knew the unwritten codes. Someone who could read energy with the accuracy of a seasoned meteorologist predicting a storm. Queen Latifah. A pillar in entertainment. A woman whose reputation carried the weight of someone who never needed to shout to be heard. Someone who didn't use pettiness as a currency, unless pushed. Why was she watching Meghan so closely? That's where the contradictions begin. Because despite the glossy photos published after the awards, despite the polished highlights and carefully clipped sound bites released by organizers, something about the night was already off before the ceremony even started. Whispered conversations. Urgent text messages. Staff rushing in tight lines. The kind of behind-the-scenes movement that only happens when someone important is demanding the kind of attention the schedule didn't plan for. And the name attached to that disruption? Meghan. You ever notice how certain celebrities carry their own weather system? Not because they want to, necessarily, but because everything around them seems to stir when they appear. Some storms are beautiful. Some are destructive. And some are unpredictable. What kind was Meghan tonight? That's the question people were asking, quietly. Because you don't ask those questions loudly when the person involved has the kind of global visibility Meghan does. You just watch. You observe. And Queen Latifah? She was observing everything. But here's the twist. It wasn't the entrance that set things in motion. It wasn't the gown. It wasn't the paparazzi. It wasn't even Meghan's intense aura. No. The spark that ultimately became an explosion that rattled social media timelines, industry pockets, and global gossip circuits began somewhere far more subtle. Backstage, in a small, decorated hallway where designers were being prepped for their presentations. A place where Meghan made a request, no, a demand, that sent the first ripple of tension through the night. And guess who witnessed it? Queen Latifah. Or, at the very least, someone close enough to her saw it and relayed it within minutes. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we unravel that moment, let's talk about why Meghan's appearance at the Fashion Trust Arabia Awards mattered more than usual. She hadn't attended high-profile fashion events in a while. Headlines had cooled. Red carpets had moved on. Designers had shifted their attention. That meant this appearance was supposed to be a comeback. A carefully orchestrated return to glamour moment intended to remind the world that Meghan Markle was still a presence, still a headline generator, still someone who could make a room react. And Meghan knew exactly what she was doing. You could see it in the way she glided from photo to photo, selecting angles in her usual meticulous way, subtly adjusting her expression with each click. It wasn't arrogance, it was intent. Meghan understands visibility. She always has. But here's the contradiction that makes the night so compelling. While Meghan was trying to reassert her presence in the industry, Queen Latifah wasn't trying to assert anything. She was there to present an award, celebrate designers, uplift creatives, and enjoy the artistry. She wasn't playing chess. She wasn't maneuvering for camera time. She wasn't creating spectacle. But the universe, or maybe the energy in that ballroom, had other plans. Because by the end of the night, she would become the central figure in one of the most unexpected moments of 2025's fashion season. Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone try to control a situation that simply did not want to be controlled? That was Meghan all night. Every move calculated, every gesture measured, every interaction choreographed. But the problem with environments like the Fashion Trust Arabia Awards is that energy doesn't follow scripts. People don't follow scripts. And most importantly, legends like Queen Latifah don't follow scripts. They follow instinct. They follow intuition. They follow truth. And everything inside the room, everything Meghan did, every eyebrow raise, every quiet murmur between organizers, was feeding Latifah information. That's the part Meghan didn't anticipate. Now let's address the question racing through your mind. Was the nickname Yacht Princess planned, or was it spontaneous? Because one version of the story paints Latifah as someone who had reached her limit, making a split-second choice in front of the world. The other version suggests she had been pushed, poked, and prodded by Meghan's behavior backstage until she reached a point where her silence became impossible. Which version is closer to the truth? Well, both, in a way. There's a detail almost no one talks about, a detail whispered by someone who worked production that night. They said Meghan insisted on certain accommodations, then tried to rearrange the running order to ensure she stood next to someone important on stage. They didn't say who. They didn't need to. The implication was clear. Meghan was trying to shape the optics of the night, strategically, visually, symbolically. Hollywood lessons die hard. But the award staff? They weren't playing that game. Which means Meghan hit her first wall of resistance early in the evening, long before Queen Latifah said a single word. And when someone reaches a wall, what do? They push harder. Meghan pushed. A little too hard. And Latifah saw it. That's the thing about moments like this. Moments that become cultural hinges. They're never caused by one spark alone. They're a chain reaction, a buildup of friction, ego, pressure, and unspoken histories. Tonight was no different. You could sense the tension growing, even before anyone said a word. Meghan was trying to reclaim goddess energy. Latifah was trying to maintain the integrity of the event. These two trajectories were always going to collide. And when they did, the impact was seismic. Here's another question. Why did the audience react the way they did when they heard Yacht Princess? Was it shock? Was it recognition? Was it confusion? Or was it the realization that someone finally said something aloud that others had only whispered? Reactions don't lie. And the reaction that night was instant. Heads turning, cameras rising, eyes widening, mouths dropping. Silence. Then a wave of gasps rolling through the room like a physical force. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin prickle. But even that wasn't the climax. Not even close. Because while Queen Latifah's words ignited the match, Meghan's reaction fed the fire. She froze. Not the frozen smile of a trained actress or a seasoned royal. No, a different kind of freeze. The freeze of someone who had been unexpectedly cornered by a reality they couldn't curate, a truth they couldn't spin, a name they didn't choose. And that reaction, that moment of undeniable vulnerability and shock, is what kept the audience locked in place. But there's something else you need to understand. Something most people gloss over. Something subtle. The look Queen Latifah gave Meghan after saying the nickname wasn't smug, spiteful, or malicious. It was measured, controlled, deliberate. The kind of look someone gives when they've simply had enough. Enough of entitlement. Enough of theatrics. Enough of performances that treat real artists like props. That look carried weight. It carried history. And it carried a message Meghan couldn't ignore. But the moment didn't end there. Because just seconds after Queen Latifah dropped the nickname heard around the fashion world, Meghan responded. And what she did next is the beginning of the real story. The part no livestream caught, the part PR teams scrambled to bury, the part insiders leaked in hushed tones. A reaction that transformed an already shocking moment into something far more dramatic, far more revealing, and far more consequential. And that reaction? Well, that's where things get unbelievable. What was Meghan's reaction in those seconds after Queen Latifah uttered the nickname that sliced through the ballroom like a sharpened piece of glass? That's the question people couldn't stop asking, even hours later, even after the PR teams had already begun drafting their contextual clarifications, even after stylists started whispering to assistants in trembling voices. Because something about her reaction didn't match what people expected. Not from a duchess, not from a former actress, not from someone who once prided herself on controlling every frame, every expression, every angle. And here's the strange part. Her reaction wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rage-filled. It wasn't even icy. It was something far more unsettling. Meghan went still. Completely, unnervingly, breathlessly still. Like a deer catching the scent of a silent predator. That's the moment the entire night tipped from glamorous to historic. Because when someone freezes, truly freezes, it's never just shock. It's recognition. So let's rewind. Let's go back to the beginning of the night. Hours before Queen Latifah stepped onto the stage. Hours before words became weapons. Hours before the glittering facade began to peel. Let's start when the tension was still invisible, when the stakes were building quietly behind the velvet curtains, and when the night still held the illusion of elegance, not eruption. Imagine the desert wind brushing across the courtyard of the venue, warm, textured, carrying the faint scent of spices and perfume. Guests dripping in couture stepped out of sleek black cars, their heels tapping against the stone like a pre-event drumbeat. The photographers were already in position, adjusting their lenses, whispering about rumored arrivals, waiting for the image that would define the night. No one expected it would be a moment inside the ceremony that would overshadow everything captured outside. From the outset, the staff sensed the energy shift when Meghan's team arrived. 3 members of the event coordination group exchanged looks almost instantly. Not irritated, not overwhelmed, but wary, like people who had worked enough high-pressure events to sense when a guest didn't plan to follow the script. Meghan walked in with that perfectly curated half-smile, the kind that suggested she already believed the night needed her more than she needed it. She paused deliberately at the step-and-repeat wall, adjusting her dress with a slow, fluid movement that looked natural but was so obviously calculated it could have been storyboard. She held her pose long enough to pause the flow of guests behind her, subtle enough not to seem rude, long enough to signal intention. People noticed. But here's where things started to fray before anyone realized it. Meghan wasn't just there to attend. She was there to reclaim relevance, reclaim attention, reclaim the narrative she felt had slipped from her hands. You could feel it in each step she took, each glance at the cameras, each tilt of her chin. It wasn't simply confidence, it was hunger. And hunger, when mixed with vanity, can be unpredictable. Queen Latifah, on the other hand, entered quietly. No entourage trailing behind her like a parade. No dramatic stance on the carpet. No forced aura of "I'm back." Just her presence, calm, grounded, naturally commanding. And that's the difference between someone who wants power and someone who already has it. Inside the venue, designers, journalists, and celebrities mingled in a sea of perfume and diamonds. Waiters glided between tables with trays of delicate hors d'oeuvres perched like jewels. A string quartet played modern songs disguised in classical arrangements. Everything was smooth, seamless, controlled. But beneath that glossy surface, something else brewed. A kind of electric tension you feel before a thunderstorm. You see the sky is still blue, but the wind isn't right, the pressure isn't right, the quiet isn't natural. And in this case, the pressure drop wasn't from nature. It was Meghan. She started small. A suggestion here, a request there, then a correction, then another, a lighting angle, a seating preference, a specific photographer to be pulled forward, all cloaked under the guise of politeness, the kind of politeness that sharpens when someone doesn't get their way. The staff complied where they could. They refused where they had to. And each refusal added a new crack to the night's smooth exterior. Not huge cracks. Not obvious ones. But still cracks. Only a few feet away, Queen Latifah watched. Or rather, she observed in that subtle way people with emotional intelligence can track a room without seeming intrusive. She wasn't judging. She wasn't annoyed. She was simply reading the energy. That was her gift, the ability to sense when someone is performing instead of participating. And Meghan? Meghan wasn't participating in this event. She was trying to direct it. Why does that matter? Because environments like the Fashion Trust Arabia Awards thrive on mutual respect. Everyone, from the designers to the presenters to the special guests, knows that the event isn't about popularity or personal spotlight. It's about celebrating creativity. Ego, if present, must be controlled. And the unspoken rule is simple. Don't try to reshape the night to center yourself. But Meghan had never been good at that rule. Not before. Not during. Certainly not tonight. The first flashpoint came backstage. It wasn't chaos. It was conflict disguised as conversation. Meghan wanted to enter one segment of the event in a different order, supposedly to align with the event flow, but everyone there saw the truth. She wanted a more flattering camera frame, a position closer to someone prestigious. And who happened to be presenting that segment? Queen Latifah. Meghan's team insisted, politely but firmly, that a last-minute adjustment would enhance the guest experience. The coordinator declined. Twice. The air thickened, and somewhere in that hallway, adorned with golden detailing and floor lamps casting warm shadows, someone took notice of the exchange. Word travels fast in environments fueled by whispers. In less than 10 minutes, 3 people knew. In 15 minutes, the story reached Latifah's assistant. And within 20, Queen Latifah herself heard some version of the interaction. Not the exaggerated one. Not the dramatic one. Just the simple, unembellished fact. Meghan was pushing boundaries, again. Here's the key moment. Latifah did not react with outrage. Not with judgment. Not even with annoyance. She simply sighed. That small, weighted sigh that only someone who has seen this pattern too many times can produce. That sigh was the first no the universe gave Meghan that night. The first barrier she didn't see coming. Meanwhile, inside the ballroom, subtle shifts in behavior began to ripple. Designers whispered to each other. Influencers noticed Meghan's increasing tension. Staff exchanged glances as if warning each other of an approaching storm front. Even the photographers sensed it, the way Meghan began positioning herself too deliberately near certain guests, too frequently in certain lighting pockets. The room wasn't turning against her. No, that would be too simple. The room was bracing itself. People talk about the calm before the storm like it's a cliché. But in rooms like this, rooms filled with ambition, ego, artistry, rivalry, the calm is never calm. It's quiet anticipation. It's pressure rising in slow increments. It's the expectation that something is going to give. And something did. The moment before the ceremony began, Meghan attempted one final adjustment to the night. She wanted a specific introduction, a specific mention, something to contextualize her presence. That was the phrase someone overheard. Not standard, not appropriate, not approved. And that moment, that one overreach, was the one that finally snapped the atmosphere in half. Because Queen Latifah heard about that one too. And when she heard it, something in her expression shifted. Not dramatic, not confrontational, something quieter, something resolute. A line being drawn internally. A mental note that this was no longer a matter of etiquette. It was a matter of principle. Latifah didn't seek confrontation. She didn't crave chaos. But she wasn't going to let entitlement rewrite the tone of a night meant to honor actual work. As guests took their seats, Meghan adjusted her posture with almost regal precision, unaware of how much the energy in the room had turned. She didn't sense the shift. She didn't notice the sideways glances. She didn't feel the air thickening around her. She was focused on the moment she believed would belong to her, the one she thought she could curate, until Queen Latifah stepped onto the stage. From the moment she walked up, the energy changed again, this time for real. Real authority, real presence, real respect. The audience quieted in a way they never quiet for hype alone. Meghan watched from her table, eyes narrowing ever so slightly, recognizing instantly that Latifah commanded something she herself had tried to manufacture: natural gravity. Latifah smiled, the kind of smile that makes people lean in. Not for gossip. For wisdom. for authenticity. And as she spoke, presenting an award with genuine appreciation for the designers, she moved with the ease of someone who had earned her place, not demanded it. And then, the moment, the pivot in her speech, the subtle shift in tone, the pause before the line, the glance toward Meghan's table. You know, some people here tonight remind me of the old days. Back when the yacht princess era was still in style. Silence. Gasps. Phones rising. Meghan's stillness. But what came next, what Meghan did next, would unravel the entire night, expose the backstage secrets, and ignite a chain reaction no one in that room was prepared for. And that moment, that reaction, it changed everything, and no one saw it coming. What exactly did Queen Latifah mean when she said yacht princess? Why did that particular nickname send a shockwave through the room strong enough to freeze Meghan Markle in place? Why those two words? Why that moment? It wasn't random. It wasn't careless. It wasn't a flippant slip of the tongue. No, it was deliberate, calculated, a pressure point pressed with surgical precision. And to understand why, you have to go back. Not just months, not just years, but deep into the mythology that constructed Meghan's public persona long before the world knew her as a duchess, a humanitarian figure, or a Hollywood headline. Because before the charity speeches and the royal weddings and the glossy magazine spreads, there was another chapter, another version of Meghan that the industry whispered about behind closed doors, in private clubs, at dinner parties, and in luxury suites where famous people let their guard down and talk like real humans again. You ever hear a rumor so persistent, so strangely sticky, that it follows someone even when they think they've outrun it? That's what yacht princess was. A term from an era Meghan wished she could erase, an era she hoped had dissolved into the fog of pre-fame obscurity. But the thing about Hollywood is this: nothing ever disappears. Nothing is forgotten. Nothing is fully buried. People talk. People remember. People connect dots. And even when they don't speak aloud, the knowledge sits in the air like a faint scent, noticeable only when something stirs it up. And Queen Latifah? She stirred the air. Not because she wanted to, but because she'd seen enough. But before we get to the why, let's unpack the what. Yacht princess didn't come from tabloids. It didn't come from trolls. It didn't come from royal reporters. It came from insiders, the people who lived in the same orbit Meghan once tried to climb. The people who saw her at events far less glamorous, far more transactional, before she married into royalty or appeared on international talk shows discussing purpose and empowerment. To be clear, every celebrity who came up in Hollywood has an origin story, some polished, some messy, some filled with ambition and struggle. Meghan's story had all of that, but it also had a unique twist. She navigated spaces where connections were currency, visibility was strategy, and appearances were everything. Nothing inherently wrong with that. That's Hollywood. But the nickname? That came from the elite social circles where certain actresses were invited onto private yachts in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean, not as guests of honor, but as part of social gatherings designed to bring rising talent into proximity with wealthy backers, producers, business magnates, and influential people looking to be entertained. Now, before your imagination runs wild, let's make something clear. These events weren't illegal. They weren't seedy. They weren't criminal. They were glamorous, over-the-top networking circles. Beautiful people, powerful investors, oceanside luxury. The same formula that built half of Hollywood's current social hierarchy. But the nickname Yacht Princess? That implied someone who didn't just attend. Someone who leveraged those gatherings strategically. Someone who turned proximity into opportunity. Someone who knew how to play the game. And whether the nickname was deserved or exaggerated, whether it was affectionate or mocking, whether it was literal or symbolic, doesn't matter. What matters is this: Meghan knew the nickname, and she hated it. Not because it was scandalous, but because it reduced her entire early career, all her hustle, all her auditions, all her roles, all her ambitions, into a single narrative she didn't choose. And Meghan has always hated narratives she didn't choose. So when Queen Latifah said it, in front of designers, royalty, influencers, cameras, socialites, journalists, it wasn't just a dig. It was a reminder, a tap on the glass of an old version of Meghan she spent years trying to outrun. And that's what made her freeze. Let's go deeper. Because the real reason this nickname struck so hard, The reason Meghan's eyes widened in that microsecond of stunned recognition lies in a specific, whispered chapter of her Hollywood past. A chapter she never denied, never confirmed, and never discussed publicly. But insiders knew. Staff knew. Producers who attended those yacht events knew. And Queen Latifah? She had been in the entertainment world long enough to hear every version of every rising star's origin story, whispered or otherwise. Not because she gossiped, she didn't. But because longevity in this industry exposes you to everything. And the longer you stay, the better your memory becomes. Now imagine being Meghan in that moment. Standing in a ballroom lit like a cathedral, surrounded by couture, cameras, and elite guests, waiting for a carefully curated moment to reassert her public image, only to hear Queen Latifah, a woman she never expected to confront her, invoke a nickname that belonged to a life Meghan pretended didn't exist. That kind of jolt isn't just embarrassment. It's exposure. It's the sudden feeling of being unmasked in a room where you needed to look untouchable. But that's not the whole story. Because the nickname Yacht Princess wasn't just a callback to Meghan's early Hollywood networking phase. It was also tied to someone else, someone who had attended those yacht circles long before Meghan ever stepped foot in them. A producer, a celebrity, a figure with connections to both Hollywood and royal circles. Someone who once introduced Meghan to a set of people that eventually shaped her career trajectory. Someone the industry whispered about, but never named in public. And if anyone knew the full story, the tangled, complicated, whispered origins of that nickname, it was Queen Latifah. Let's rewind again. Years before the royal wedding, before the global interviews, before the charity tours and the dramatic exits, Meghan had a stretch of time where she wasn't landing roles consistently. Not unheard of. Most actors don't. But Meghan was ambitious. She wanted more than a guest appearance or a supporting role. She wanted visibility. She wanted access. She wanted a seat at a table that still saw her as an outsider. So when someone influential extended an invitation to a summer gathering on a yacht off the coast of Sardinia, Meghan said yes. And she said yes again the next time. And again. And again. Always for networking. Always for visibility. Always for building relationships. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's how much of Hollywood works. Private social events that operate as informal casting rooms. But there was one yacht event, one specific summer, where Meghan's presence became unforgettable in that circle. Not because she was doing anything wrong, not because she was involved in scandal, but because she carried herself in a way that struck people as strategic. She made connections quickly. She positioned herself near the most influential people. She charmed. She listened. She maneuvered. And eventually, someone, no one remembers exactly who, began calling her Yacht Princess. A joke at first, a reference among insiders, a nickname that stuck just enough to be carried from one summer to the next. And Meghan knew this. She heard it back then, and she hated it even then. So when Queen Latifah said it in that ballroom, it wasn't just a ghost from the past. It was a ghost Meghan thought she had finally exorcised by stepping into a royal life. But ghosts don't disappear. They wait, especially when someone tries to bury them beneath a curated public image. Now here's the twist most people don't know. Queen Latifah didn't bring up that nickname because she hated Meghan. She didn't do it out of jealousy. She didn't do it for attention. She didn't do it for drama. She did it because of what Meghan said backstage. Remember? The request. The demand. The insistence that the event be restructured to highlight her presence. That wasn't just rude. It was disrespectful to the designers the event was meant to celebrate. It was entitlement masquerading as influence. And Latifah had seen this exact behavior before, not from Meghan, but from dozens of young stars who came up through the same Hollywood circles Meghan once moved in. The ones who learned the wrong lessons from early visibility. The ones who thought clout could substitute for character. That's when the past snapped into place for Latifah. That's when she made the connection. That's when she realized the nickname she'd heard years ago wasn't just a joke, it was a warning. So when she said it on stage, she wasn't trying to humiliate Meghan. She was calling out behavior Meghan had spent her entire adult life hiding behind strategy and polish. She was naming the thing Meghan avoided confronting. But here's the part that makes everything more complicated. Meghan knew all of this. She knew exactly why the nickname landed with such force. She knew exactly how many people in that room recognized the reference. She knew exactly how deep that cut went. And that's why she froze. Her eyes widened. Her breath halted. Her face dropped not in anger, but in panic. The past she thought she had left behind had just reappeared, wearing Queen Latifah's voice. But what happened next, what Meghan did next, was something no insider expected. Not her team, not the organizers, not even Queen Latifah. Because Meghan didn't stay frozen. She reacted. Fast. Emotionally. Desperately. And that reaction would change the entire tone of the night. What do you think a legend looks like in the moments before she decides to act? Before she speaks a line that slices through the air and lands with the force of a cultural earthquake? Before she triggers a reaction that no handler, no stylist, no PR strategist on earth could control? You might imagine fire, fury, obvious tension. But that wasn't Queen Latifah. Not tonight. Not ever. Before she delivered the now infamous Yacht Princess line, her warning signs were so subtle, so microscopic, so deeply rooted in the discipline of a seasoned powerhouse that only those who understood energy, truly understood it, recognized what was coming. And the irony? Meghan missed every single one. Let's rewind to 20 minutes before the moment that would dominate global headlines. Queen Latifah stood near the backstage curtain, holding the award envelope with both hands, her expression soft but focused. She wore a gown with sharp, regal lines, not flashy, not loud, but undeniably commanding. She spoke calmly to a staff member about timing cues, nodding with professional ease, completely oblivious to the quiet disruption unfolding just a few meters behind her. But when the staffer leaned in and whispered something into her ear, something brief, something that made her eyes narrow almost imperceptibly, that's when the first warning sign appeared. She didn't react. She didn't frown. She didn't say a word. She just inhaled slowly, held the breath longer than usual, and exhaled with the kind of slow, controlled release only practiced, centered people ever achieve. Anyone who knew Queen Latifah well could read that for exactly what it was, a sign of restraint. Because restraint always comes before a decision. What had she been told? The shortened version of Meghan's latest backstage request, the one asking for a segment rearrangement so her introduction appeared more aligned with the narrative of the evening. A harmless phrase on paper, but in the context of an award show, an unmistakable attempt to hijack the spotlight. And Queen Latifah, who had seen decades of stars, influencers, moguls, divas, dreamers, narcissists, and icons, knew immediately what that meant. She said nothing in response, but her energy shifted. And energy doesn't lie. But here's where the second warning sign emerged, one even more revealing than the first. Queen Latifah's assistant approached with a soft, respectful tone, saying, "I'll handle it. Don't worry." The look Queen Latifah gave her in that moment said everything. A look that wasn't annoyed, wasn't angry, but carried a nuance most people never catch: disappointment. Not in the assistant, not in the staff, but in the situation, the culture, the entitlement, the unnecessary chaos that some people bring into spaces full of hardworking artists simply because they're addicted to visibility. And that disappointment, that was the root of what came next. Because Queen Latifah is old-school Hollywood in the best way, the era where you earned the room before you owned the room, where respect wasn't demanded, it was exchanged, where self-importance wasn't mistaken for substance. And Meghan, tonight, was violating every rule Latifah had spent her entire career upholding. But Meghan didn't see any of this. She wasn't in tune with Latifah's energy. She didn't feel the shift in the room. Instead, she remained laser-focused on positioning herself, adjusting her posture, rehearsing her expression, whispering to her assistant about lighting angles. Meghan lived in a world constructed of optics. Queen Latifah lived in a world built on authenticity. And when those two worlds collide, someone always shatters. The third warning sign came moments before Latifah walked onto stage. She stood still, eyes closed for a brief second, grounding herself the way performers often do right before stepping into the spotlight. But then, and this is the part only a handful of people noticed, her jaw tightened. Not clenched, not angry. Just a tightening that suggested she was preparing herself emotionally for something she didn't want to do, but now felt compelled to. It wasn't pettiness. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't ego. It was principle. Because Queen Latifah didn't have to say anything that night. She could have kept it professional, glided through her script, and left the venue with her legacy untouched and her dignity intact. But when someone disrupts an environment meant to honor other artists, not themselves, Latifah sees that as a breach, a violation of creative respect, and she would never be the kind of person to watch that happen silently. Let's zoom out for a moment. Think about who Queen Latifah is. The rapper who broke barriers. The actress who transcended categories. The producer who lifted others with her. She's the type of woman who, when she enters a room, doesn't shrink others to make space for herself. She expands the room to fit everyone. So imagine how she felt watching Meghan, a guest, a non-nominee, a non-presenter, a largely symbolic attendee, trying to rearrange the architecture of an entire event just to secure a moment of attention. That wasn't ambition. That was disrespect. And Latifah had no tolerance for disrespect in creative spaces. Meanwhile, at her table, Meghan sensed none of the tension brewing just beyond her line of sight. She sat with an expression that hovered between expectation and entitlement, unaware that her backstage behavior had already circulated among key figures in the room. Meghan believed she had crafted the perfect re-entry moment, a glamorous arc, a triumphant comeback, a presence that would eclipse any shadow cast by past controversies. And for a split second, the night seemed ready to give her exactly that. Until Queen Latifah walked on stage. The audience clapped instantly, instinctively. Not out of habit, but out of genuine admiration for a woman who had earned her throne in Hollywood. Latifah offered the room a warm, commanding smile. Her posture radiated ease and confidence. She didn't need theatrics. She didn't need dramatic gestures. Her presence alone cast a spell. Meghan watched with something between admiration and suspicion. Latifah wasn't just a star, she was a standard, and Meghan knew it. Then came the fourth warning sign, the big one. The one that, had Meghan been paying attention, might have saved her from what came next. As Latifah opened her envelope, she glanced, briefly, directly, unmistakably, at Meghan's table. Not a glare, not a hostile stare, just a knowing look. A look that said, I saw what you did. I understand who you are, and I won't let this space be disrupted. That look lasted less than a second, but it carried decades of experience in its weight. And Meghan missed it. Of course she did. Because Meghan was too busy preparing a smile, she planned to deliver to the cameras once Latifah finished speaking. Bad timing. Very bad timing. Because that was the moment Latifah shifted her tone. The audience felt it first, a subtle change in cadence, a questioning note in her voice, a small pause. The kind of pause that makes people lean forward instinctively, sensing that something unscripted is about to happen. Even the cameramen hesitated, hands tightening on their rigs. Latifah inhaled. She adjusted the envelope. She looked back toward Meghan's section of the room. And then, with the calmest, clearest, most devastating delivery imaginable, she said, You know, some people here tonight remind me of the old days. Back when the yacht princess era was still in style. The room froze. Not metaphorically. Literally. Forks halted midair. Dinner conversations stopped mid-sentence. A guest in the second row dropped their program. Someone backstage whispered, Oh my God. But this wasn't the actual explosion. This was the spark. Because Queen Latifah's face, her expression, that was the final warning sign. A warning not for Meghan, but for everyone watching. Her expression wasn't triumphant. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't amused. It was sad. Sad in that way only older, wiser women get when they see someone younger repeating mistakes they've seen destroy thousands of promising careers. Sad in the way people get when they realize someone has learned nothing from the opportunities they were given. Sad in the way a queen looks at someone who wants the throne but refuses the responsibility that comes with it. That expression told the entire story. Queen Latifah wasn't attacking Meghan. She was exposing her. And Meghan felt that. Deeply. Instantly. Because that look, that warning, carried a truth far heavier than any insult could ever deliver. I see you. I know who you are. And I won't let you disrespect this room. But Meghan didn't react with humility. She didn't react with reflection. She didn't react with composure. What she did next, what no one expected, would escalate the night from shocking to catastrophic. And the moment she stood up, everything changed. Why did Meghan stand up? Why that exact second? Why that exact moment in front of hundreds of designers, global influencers, industry leaders, journalists, and 24 cameras waiting to capture every flicker of emotion? Was it anger? Was it shock? Was it instinct? Or was it something deeper, something more primal? The urgent need to regain control after feeling it ripped away so publicly? Because when Meghan rose from her seat, it wasn't graceful. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't the smooth, polished movement of a woman accustomed to playing to the cameras. It was abrupt, sharp, a jolt, like someone whose carefully curated mask had slipped, revealing the raw nerves underneath. And the room felt it. As Meghan pushed her chair back, the scrape against the floor echoed just loud enough for nearby guests to turn their heads. Eyes widened. Breath hitched. The energy in the ballroom shifted instantly, as if everyone sensed danger before understanding its shape. Her team, 3 people seated strategically around her, reacted half a second too late. They lunged to rise with her, whispering frantic words, but Meghan was already moving, already locked in on a single destination, backstage. And what happens when a high-profile guest suddenly walks toward the restricted area during a live ceremony? Security moves. Fast. 2 guards stepped forward instinctively, not to block her, but to guide her, because that's what their training dictated. You don't obstruct a VIP. You redirect them. But Meghan didn't want redirection. She wanted confrontation. Queen Latifah was still on stage, still holding the envelope, still standing in the spotlight, completely unaware that Meghan was now cutting through the room like a storm that had broken containment. Guests watched in frozen fascination. Some whispered. Some pretended not to notice. Some began filming, discreetly, phones half concealed beneath the tablecloths. The tension was thick enough to taste. Even the music, the soft ambient melody that had been playing between speeches, felt out of place now, like the soundtrack to a scene that had suddenly turned too real. But backstage, that was where the real story unfolded. Backstage was chaos. A controlled chaos, usually. Organized. Quiet. Efficient. Staff wearing headsets whispered into microphones, checking cue lists and lighting notes. Designers paced nervously. Assistants held garment bags, jewelry trays, and stacks of scripts. Tech crews adjusted microphones and cables, moving with the practiced rhythm of people who understand that the show cannot stop under any circumstances. But the moment Meghan appeared at the edge of the curtain, everything snapped. The first person to see her was a production assistant carrying a tray of bottled water. He nearly dropped it when he recognized her. The next was the stage manager, a woman with years of experience who had learned to detect trouble from half a room away. And Meghan, jaw clenched, eyes sharp, breathing fast, looked like trouble. "Ma'am, you can't be back here right now," the stage manager said, stepping forward with a kind of polite firmness only people who have dealt with extremely powerful egos can master. Meghan didn't answer. She didn't even look at her. She looked past her, through her. Eyes fixed on Queen Latifah's silhouette on stage, framed by the warm stage lighting, her figure impossibly regal. Meghan's pulse was visible at her neck. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with something far more combustible, indignation. She whispered something, low, fast, unintelligible, to one of her staffers, who nodded quickly and tried to intercept the stage manager with a diplomatic smile. "She just needs a moment," he said. "It's urgent." Urgent? Backstage staff shared looks. Nothing is urgent during a live ceremony except technical failure. If a VIP needed something, it happened before the show or after, never during. But before anyone could enforce protocol, Meghan stepped forward again, brushing past the hands that attempted to slow her down. That was when Queen Latifah finished her segment. She hadn't left the stage yet. She was still handing the award to the designer, still smiling, still being the consummate professional she always was. But Meghan didn't care about timing. She saw her chance. She saw the path opening. She moved. That's when camera feeds were abruptly switched. In the control room, technicians watched multiple angles on screens. They saw Meghan's silhouette cutting across the backstage area. They saw her posture. They recognized the risk. A confrontation between 2 high-profile public figures couldn't, and wouldn't, be allowed to air. One technician muttered, "Switch the feed now." Another said, "Get her off that angle." A third said, "Who let her back there?" And suddenly, The cameras that had been aimed at the stage shifted to crowd shots, the visual equivalent of a fire alarm. The audience didn't know why the camera angles changed. The viewers at home didn't know. The journalists seated in the press section didn't know. But backstage, everyone knew, because Meghan was now standing at the base of the stairs leading up to the stage. Security stiffened. Two guards subtly moved into position, anticipating the possibility, unlikely, but now shockingly plausible, that Meghan might actually walk up onto the stage during the live ceremony. It would have been a breach of protocol so extreme that it would have overshadowed the yacht princess moment entirely. But Meghan didn't ascend the stairs. She waited. Waited for Queen Latifah to exit. Waited for her moment. Waited for the confrontation. And Queen Latifah? She sensed something the second she stepped off stage. Call it intuition. Call it experience. Call it the sixth sense women earn after decades of navigating egos in the entertainment industry. The moment she crossed into the backstage shadows, her expression changed, not out of fear, not out of discomfort, but out of recognition. She saw Meghan standing there, saw the storm in her eyes, saw the trembling hands, saw the fury hiding beneath a mask cracking too quickly for her to contain it. "Is there something you need?" Latifah asked, her voice calm, low, controlled. Not defensive, not confrontational, just grounded. And that calmness, that unshakable stability, is what finally tipped Meghan over the edge. Because what Meghan expected was an apology. What Meghan wanted was a justification. What Meghan demanded was recognition that Queen Latifah had wronged her. Instead, she received composure. And composure is the one thing that can shatter someone who is losing control. "You had no right," Meghan hissed, stepping forward. "You had absolutely no right to say that about me. Not here. Not tonight. Not ever." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The tightness of her tone carried the intensity. Staff members froze in place, pretending to continue working while straining to hear every syllable. Queen Latifah didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at Meghan with a kind of quiet authority that decades of hard-earned respect had built. "It was a reference," Latifah said. "A metaphor. Nothing more." "You knew exactly what you were doing," Meghan snapped. "You knew what that nickname meant." Latifah paused, a pause that said she was choosing her next words very carefully. Because despite everything, despite the tension, despite the insult she delivered on stage, she wasn't trying to escalate this. She wasn't the one who created the spectacle. She wasn't the one who chased confrontation. Meghan was. "Maybe I did," Latifah finally said. "Or maybe you're reacting this strongly because you know there's truth in it." Silence. A long, dangerous, razor-sharp silence. One staffer backstage swore they heard a pin drop. Literally, a decorative pin falling from someone's garment and hitting the floor, and even that sound felt too loud in the moment. Meghan's face twisted, not in anger, but in something deeper, something closer to humiliation, the kind that bubbles from old wounds, not new ones. "You don't know anything about me," she whispered, each word shaking. Latifah held her gaze, steady, unmoving, unintimidated. "I know enough," she replied softly. "Enough to know when someone's forgotten what respect looks like." That was the breaking point. Meghan stepped forward again. Not touching Latifah, not raising her voice, but closing the distance in a way that made security tense behind them. "You think you can talk to me like that? You think you can humiliate me and just walk away?" she demanded, her tone trembling with a hybrid of past pain and present rage. Latifah leaned in, her expression calm, her voice even softer. "I didn't humiliate you. I revealed you. And that was it." That was the moment Meghan knew she had lost control. Not just of the night, not just of the narrative, but of the facade she had worked so tirelessly to maintain. But before Meghan could respond, before she could reclaim an ounce of power, something happened backstage that no camera caught and no guest in the ballroom even suspected. Someone else stepped forward, someone with information, someone who witnessed what Meghan did earlier that night, someone who would soon leak everything. And that person's whisper would change the entire direction of the fallout. The whisper came from the least expected person in the room, a junior production assistant, barely 25, forgotten by most VIPs the moment they walked past him, a quiet observer stationed a few feet behind Queen Latifah in case she needed water or a teleprompter update. He moved silently, carrying clipboards, adjusting props, making sure the stage functioned like a machine with no visible seams. People barely noticed him. And that made him dangerous, because people reveal their worst behavior when they assume the person standing near them doesn't matter. Meghan had assumed exactly that. So when he stepped forward, timidly, hesitating at first, but gathering courage because he knew what he'd heard could change everything, the air around the confrontation thickened like a rope being pulled too tight. "Ma'am," he whispered to the stage manager, his voice trembling, eyes wide. "You need to know what she said earlier. Before the show." He didn't say Meghan's name. He didn't need to. Everyone knew exactly who she was. The stage manager stiffened. Queen Latifah's gaze flicked toward him. Meghan turned sharply, eyes blazing. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, her words quiet but slicing. The assistant swallowed hard, clearly terrified but unwilling to back down now that he'd opened his mouth. "I'm sorry. I heard her telling one of the staff that the designers featured tonight weren't big enough for her to be associated with." He flinched as he said it, anticipating Meghan's fury. "She said she needed to be grouped with the ones who had actual relevance." "I heard it. So did two others." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence thicker than anything in the ballroom. Meghan's jaw dropped open, the outrage in her eyes colliding with the shock that the assistant dared to speak. "That is a lie," she said, each word sharp enough to cut stone. "You're misunderstanding what I said. You didn't hear it correctly." The assistant shrank back, cheeks burning, but Queen Latifah stepped forward, not aggressively, not harshly, but with a kind of grounded authority that made everyone freeze. "What exactly did she say?" Latifah asked quietly. The assistant hesitated, terrified, but he answered. "She said, I can't be put next to designers no one cares about. My brand matters too. Fix it." A low murmur spread through the backstage area. One stylist gasped. A lighting tech shook his head. The stage manager's lips tightened. Because this event, the Fashion Trust Arabia Awards, wasn't like Hollywood award shows where PR manipulation was baked into the DNA of the evening. This wasn't Oscars politics or Golden Globes networking. This was about creative craft, designers, artisans, rising talents who depended on every ounce of visibility. This event wasn't meant for ego. It wasn't meant for spectacle. It wasn't meant for Meghan Markle's personal narrative. And Queen Latifah knew that better than anyone. Her eyes softened, not with kindness, but with a kind of weary disappointment that hit harder than anger ever could. She turned to Meghan, voice measured. "Is that true?" Meghan stepped forward, her face flushed, hand raised slightly in a gesture that blended frustration with desperation. "I said nothing like that. This is a complete misrepresentation. You're all twisting my words because you don't understand context." Her voice grew sharper with every syllable, panic tightening her tone. "I was simply trying to align myself with the designer I was originally scheduled to be near. That's all. Everything else is invention." Queen Latifah didn't blink. "Did you or did you not ask them to change your placement?" she asked. Meghan hesitated. A second too long. A second that said more than a confession. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I had concerns about the layout. That's normal for someone in my position. You know that." Latifah exhaled slowly, the same slow, deliberate exhale that had appeared earlier, the one that signaled restraint. "That's not the same thing," she said. Meghan's voice grew shrill. "This is a witch hunt. This is harassment. I came here to support the arts and celebrate creativity. You're all trying to twist things because you're threatened by my presence." "Threatened?" A nearby designer muttered under her breath. "By what?" Meghan heard it. Her eyes snapped toward the voice. The designer quickly looked away, pretending to adjust a bracelet. Queen Latifah stepped closer, not invading Meghan's space, but anchoring the moment with gravity. "You showed disrespect," she said softly. "Not to me. Not even to the event. To the designers whose work you claim to support. That is not enough." Latifah's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The word alone carried the weight of decades. Enough pretending. Enough theatrics. Enough manipulation. Meghan froze. The backstage crew froze. Even the sound of the live ceremony bleeding through the curtains seemed to hold for a moment. "You walked backstage tonight acting like this show was yours to shape," Latifah continued. "But it wasn't. It's not your night. It's not your platform. And it's not your story." Meghan's lips trembled. Not with sadness, with rage. "You humiliated me," she whispered. "You humiliated yourself," Latifah replied. "All I did was hold up a mirror." It was a devastating line. Not cruel, not vicious, but true in a way that pierced deeper than any insult. And then, the moment that escalated the tension beyond repair, the stage manager stepped forward, clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. "Meghan, you are not permitted backstage during live segments," she said cautiously. "You need to return to your table." Meghan turned on her, practically vibrating with indignation. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded. The exact phrase every handler in Hollywood fears hearing from any celebrity, because it signals the total collapse of self-awareness. Queen Latifah closed her eyes for a brief moment, not out of anger, but out of sadness. "Baby," she said quietly, "that's exactly the problem. You don't." The words hit the air like a blow. Meghan stumbled backward as if physically struck. Not because Latifah yelled, not because she shamed her, because the sentence was too honest. The backstage crew didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. And in that moment, when Meghan's shock collided with Latifah's calm, something else happened. Something no one expected. A second assistant stepped forward. "I heard her too," she said quietly. "About the designers." Meghan's head whipped toward her, eyes wide with horror. "I didn't say anything like that," she protested, voice cracking. "You people are ganging up on me. You're trying to sabotage me." But the second assistant didn't back down. "You said you needed to be placed next to the only designers with real influence." Those were your words. Meghan sucked in a breath like someone drowning. Her carefully constructed night, her comeback moment, was collapsing around her. Queen Latifah watched her with a strange mixture of sympathy and resolve. "You can't keep doing this," Latifah murmured. "You can't keep acting like the room owes you something." "It does owe me something," Meghan shouted. Too loudly, too rawly, too honestly. Gasps rippled through the backstage staff. Even Meghan looked stunned at her own volume. Her hand rose to her mouth as if trying to catch the words midair. But it was too late. She had revealed herself. And Latifah, heartbroken but resolute, delivered the line that would echo through every insider's account of the night. "No, sweetheart. The room owes you nothing. But you owe the room respect." Meghan crumbled, emotion tightening her shoulders, a trembling breath leaving her chest, her eyes shining with fury and humiliation intertwined. But before anything else could unfold, before Meghan could recover or retaliate, the stage manager's headset buzzed loudly. She pressed a hand to her earpiece, listened for a second, then froze. And her voice, strained and trembling, delivered the sentence that would shift the night into an even more explosive direction. "They're asking for Queen Latifah to come back to the stage. There's been a development, a twist, a turn no one saw coming." And what happened next would ignite the second explosion of the night. What kind of development could possibly pull Queen Latifah back onto that stage after the tension backstage had reached a level so combustible that one wrong sentence could have blown the entire event apart? What announcement could have been so urgent, so unexpected, so dramatic that the organizers were willing to interrupt the show, override the teleprompter, and reorder the ceremony? Because backstage, as that crackling message spilled through the stage manager's headset, the look on her face wasn't just shock. It was dread, real dread, the kind that told every staff member within earshot that whatever was happening out front was about to collide with whatever was happening backstage, violently. Queen Latifah turned to the stage manager with steady eyes. "What do you mean? They need me back." They're requesting you," the stage manager stammered. "Something happened on stage. The designer you presented to, there's been an issue. You need to go." Meghan's face twisted, confusion folding into frustration, frustration mutating into suspicion. A fresh storm began building behind her eyes. "Of course," she muttered under her breath. "Of course something happens right now." But Queen Latifah didn't look at Meghan anymore. Didn't acknowledge the muttered bitterness, the simmering resentment, the chaotic energy swirling around her. She simply handed her envelope to a passing